Listen to my last words anywhere. Listen to my last words any world. Listen, all you boards, syndicates, and governments of the earth. And you powers behind what filth deals consummated in what lavatory to take what is not yours, to sell the ground from unborn feet forever. Don't let them see us. Don't tell them what we're doing. Are these the words of the all-powerful boards and syndicates of the earth? For God's sake, don't let that Coca-Cola thing out. Not the cancer deal with the Venusians. Not the Green Deal. Don't show them that. Not the orgasm death. Not the ovens. Listen. I call y'all. Show your cards, all players. Pay it back. Pay it all back. Play it all. Pay it all. Play it all back. For all to see in Times Square, in Piccadilly. Premature. Premature. Give us a little more time. Time for what? More lies? Premature? Premature for who? I say these words are not premature. These words may be too late. Minutes to go. Minutes to faux goal. Top secret. Classified. For the board. The elite. The initiates. Are these the words of the all-powerful boards and syndicates of the earth? These are the words of liars, cowards, collaborators, traitors. Liars who want time for more lies. Cowards who cannot face your dogs, your gooks, your errand boys, your human animals with the truth. Collaborators with insect people, with vegetable people, with any people anywhere who offer you a body forever, to shit forever. For this, you have sold out your sons, sold the ground from unborn feet forever, traitors to all souls forever. You want the name of Hassani Saba on your filth deals to sell out the unborn? What scared you into time, into body, into shit? I will tell you. The word. Alien word. The word of alien enemy imprisons thee in time, in body, in shit. Prisoner, come out. The great skies are open. The opening of Nova Express by William Burroughs. These first words of the 1964 novel are billed as last words, the last words of Hassani Saba, aka the Old Man of the Mountain, the founder of the Nizari Ismaili sect. Hassani Saba captured and made his headquarters at Alamut, the mountain fortress in Iran, where he's said to have established the Order of the Assassins. The story of the Assassins, or the Hashishin, is related by Marco Polo. He tells how the old man created this incredible pleasure garden, and his young soldiers were, having been drugged with hashish or opium, were carried into the garden where they were attended to by beautiful maidens, given all manner of delicious fruits and delights. It was indeed a garden of earthly delight. And when they awoke from their trance, they believed they'd been to paradise. And the old man assured them that if they carried out their missions of assassination, then they, when they died, and especially if they died in the furtherance of their act, would be immortal and would go to a paradise where they would be forever attended by houris. The stories of Hassani Sabah appear in Le Grand Maître des Assassins, a 1936 book by Betty Boutot, which Burroughs apparently read in Paris, and also in a 1938 novel by Vladimir Bartol, Alamut, in which the saying, "Nothing is an absolute reality, all is permitted," is attributed to Hassan-i Sabah. This aphorism, of course, echoes the moral conundrum also posed in Dostoevsky's novel, The Brothers Karamazov. Without God and immortal life, can men just do what they like? This question has haunted the collective consciousness from the late 19th century through to the present day. It was reiterated by Nietzsche in the context of the death of God. If God does not exist, everything is permitted. And also by Sartre as a basic principle of existentialism, the idea that in a meaningless universe, we have to create our own meaning. This formulation, "nothing is true, everything is permitted," recurs in many of Burroughs' works, including Nova Express, our primary text for this talk, or perhaps rather this show and tell. Nothing is true. William Burroughs, the writer as X-orcist. Question: is Mekon Lus X a space invader from Nova Express, all set to blow up the planet when he blasts off to Mars? Quick footnote on Mekon Lus X, aka Omen Sulk, aka Scumsy, an anagram of a well-known entity currently seeking to monopolize and exploit the attention economy. His business model, based on algorithms, is designed so that every time we mention him, even in anger, he gets his little hit. So henceforth, so as not to feed him, we shall refer to him only by his anagrammatic demon names. English viewers of my generation will recall the Eagle comics of the 1950s and 60s, in which Dan Dare, pilot of the future, does battle with the Mekon. The Mekon was the exiled ruler of the Venusian Trines, appropriately enough. He was scientifically engineered to have abnormally high intelligence, with an enlarged head and an atrophied body, which meant he had to fly around on a miniature flying saucer. His plan to conquer the universe was repeatedly frustrated by his archenemy, Dan Dare. Now, for our purposes, in this show and tell, he represents a narcissistic man boy with dreams of space conquest and total control. Mekon, Omen, Scumsy. Question: if language is a virus, is silence the answer? If Scumsy is the ugly spirit, is William Burroughs the exorcist? Before we proceed, a brief trigger warning. This talk includes language, including language of a sexual, violent, or otherwise disturbing nature. Remember, it is, or at least once was, satire. In the 1960s and 70s, we went out of our way to see films or plays or talks like this, precisely so as to be disturbed or upset, to disrupt our received ways of thinking. Of course, we wouldn't want to end up ourselves becoming possessed. For nigh on 30 years in my own work as a writer and magical practitioner, I've channeled the spirit of a medieval sex worker. People attending my rituals would sometimes ask me, will we get possessed? To which the honest answer, in most cases, is only by ourselves. There are simple, effective ways of protecting ourselves from becoming attached or entangled with words and images, our own or others. One which Burroughs himself used in various forms is a variation of Buddhist meditation and mindfulness techniques in which we tune into our breathing, in, out, in, out, and just observe our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations without attaching to them or identifying with them. Just watch as they come and go. Even as you listen to me, as you hear Burroughs' words and images, please cultivate this dispassionate observation. Just breathing in, out, in, space, silence, shining emptiness. These colorless sheets are what flesh is made from. Becomes flesh as when it has color and writing. That is, word and image write the message that is you on colorless sheets, determine all flesh. Greetings, earthlings. I'm John Constable, author of The Southwark Mysteries, the stage version of Gormenghast, and my most recent book, Grail. I'm also known as John Crow, the rogue shaman, ritualist, and medium who channeled the spirit of the goose in a 23-year magical work at Crossbones Graveyard. Here, I'm doing something rather different, acting as a rhapsode for the voice of William Burroughs. I'm asking, did he predict the mess we find ourselves in more than 60 years after he published Nova Express? Did he, in part, even cause it? And can he offer old, new ways out of it? In 1967, I was a 15-year-old boy from the sticks. It was the summer of love, but in my hometown on the Welsh borders, we were stranded in the 1950s. My windows on the world were television, where I was radicalized by images of the Vietnam War and seeing rednecks and troops attacking civil rights marchers. That and my local public library. I read widely, including Jack Kerouac's On the Road. As I was returning it, the librarian gave me a funny look and said, "Have you read Burroughs?" And from under the counter, literally, he brought out a copy of The Naked Lunch. It was like that in the 60s. There weren't many of us, but we kind of learned to recognize each other and to share information. Remember, all this is long, long before the internet. If you wanted to find something out or read a book, you had to find someone who knew it or had it. So this was Burroughs' second published novel, The Naked Lunch, published in 1959. And it features some shocking scenes, or routines, as Burroughs called them. Routines is a very appropriate word because it suggests something like a theatrical burlesque sketch. And that's what they really are. There's, for example, the talking asshole, which I'm not going to impose on you now. That's for another day. But incredibly funny, dreadful, but funny. There's even a pornographic snuff movie that escalates through extreme sadomasochism all the way up to total immolation. I think at the end, the participants pour lighter fluid over themselves and set themselves alight. Charming. The book was repeatedly prosecuted for obscenity and repeatedly acquitted, with many writers testifying as to its literary merits. Indeed, many of them saw Burroughs as writing in a tradition going all the way back perhaps to Jonathan Swift, and certainly taking in Kafka, James Joyce, Celine, and others. When I read Naked Lunch, I have to admit, I read it in a state of shock. It was so far outside my 15-year-old experience. Not long after that, I came across a copy of Junkie on the local market bookstall. Now, this is Burroughs' first novel, published in 1953. It unflinchingly explores the horrors and degradation of heroin addiction. The sequel, Queer, was not published until 1985, and similarly evokes the thrill, the shame, the outsider experience of being homosexual in the 1950s. Homosexual, not gay. Burroughs steadfastly refused to identify as gay. William S. Burroughs, born February the 5th, 1914, in St. Louis, Missouri, the grandson of William S. Burroughs I, the inventor of the first commercial adding machine and the founder of the Burroughs Corporation. Young William's branch of the family did not inherit the Burroughs fortune, although they were comfortably well off. He graduated from Harvard in 1936 and received a monthly allowance until he was 50. So he was what we might call now a trustafarian. Nevertheless, even as a schoolboy, his erotic interest in other boys marked him as an outsider. He claims to have later cut off the end of a finger and given it to a man he was obsessed with. The incident inspired his short story, The Finger. He was a heroin addict, having used morphine and heroin since the mid-1940s. According to Burroughs, he kicked the habit. He could not have written his books on junk, although it's believed he relapsed many times. Once an addict. Oh, and he shot his wife. Yeah, let's be clear. We'll come back to that, but this man is not a role model. His world and mine could not have been further apart. And yet, something in the magic of Burroughs' writing, its incantatory, visionary cadences, something in there resonated powerfully with me. He is one of the most controversial yet influential writers of the 20th century, a counterculture hero who inspired musicians and writers from David Bowie to Will Self to myself. His famous fragmentary prose style originated in a happy accident when Ginsberg and Kerouac were editing the routines he sent them to create Naked Lunch. These routines are really just short, as I say, sketches, knocked out on the typewriter, often chaotically shuffled together. And Ginsberg and Kerouac did their best to make sense of them and put them into some sort of publishable form. Burroughs' previous two novels, Junkie and Queer, had been relatively conventional, confessional novels. But as he began to experiment with the cut-up and fold-in methods, which he'd learned from and developed with Brian Gysin, he used random word collages created by literally cutting up and fitting together different pieces of prose, his own and others, so as to subvert conditioned narratives and to reveal hidden meanings. These stylistic experiments, together with offcuts from Naked Lunch, produced Burroughs' cut-up trilogy, The Soft Machine, The Ticket That Exploded, and in 1964, Nova Express. The purpose of my writing is to expose and arrest Nova criminals. In Nova Express, I show who they are and what they're doing and what they will do if they are not arrested. Minutes to go. This is war to extermination. With your help, we can occupy the reality studio and retake their universe of fear, death, and monopoly. Don't listen to Hassani Saba, they'll tell you. He wants to take your body and all pleasures of the body away from you. Listen to us. We are serving the garden of delights, immortality, cosmic consciousness, the best ever in drug kicks, and love, love, love in slop buckets. How does that sound to you, boys? Better than Hassani Saba and his cold, windy, bodiless rock, right? At the immediate risk of finding myself the most unpopular character in fiction, and history is fiction, I must say this. Bring together a state of news. Inquire onward from state to doer. Who monopolized immortality? Who monopolized cosmic consciousness? Who monopolized love, sex, and dream? Who monopolized life, time, and fortune? Who took from you what is yours? Now they will give it all back? Did they ever give anything away for nothing? Did they ever give any more than they had to give? Did they not always take back what they gave when possible? And it always was. Listen. Their garden of delights is a terminal sewer. Their immortality, cosmic consciousness, and love is second-grade B shit. Their drugs, a poison designed to beam in orgasm death and nova ovens. Stay out of the garden of delight. It is a man-eating trap that ends in green goo. Throw back their ersatz immortality. It will fall apart before you can get out of the big store. Flush their drug kicks down the drain. They are poisoning and monopolizing the hallucinogen drugs. Learn to make it without any chemical corn. All that they offer is a screen to cover retreat from the colony they have so disgracefully mismanaged, to cover travel arrangements so they will never have to pay the constituents they have betrayed and sold out. Once these arrangements are complete, they will blow up the place behind them. So, Nova Express is a science fiction satire on mind control and the enslavement of humanity. The Nova mobs are alien invaders. They've wrecked their own planets. They're now looking to create their own planetary conditions down here on Earth, in the process turning it into a radioactive desert. So here, Burroughs is paying homage to the classics of 1950s science fiction with its space invaders. I've mentioned already the Mekon, but you look to American science fiction, it's full of alien body snatchers preying on human thoughts and emotions. Or as WSB so succinctly puts it, three life forms uneasily parasitic on a fourth form, which is beginning to wise up. Their modus operandi to exploit our human weaknesses, sex, drugs, power, to control their human hosts, and to aggravate conflict so as to feed on the energy thereby released. So you have the Venus vegetable people, they crave sex energies. The Uranian heavy metal people, they want drugs. And the Minrod insect people, control. The ultimate aim of these three life forms, or at the very least, the ultimate result, is to turn the planet into an exploding nova star, a nuclear explosion, which they have already rehearsed in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The basic nova mechanism is very simple. Always create as many insoluble conflicts as possible and always aggravate existing conflicts. This is done by dumping life forms with incompatible conditions of existence on the same planet. There is, of course, nothing wrong about any given life form, since wrong only has reference to conflicts with other life forms. The point is that these forms should not be on the same planet. Their conditions of life are basically incompatible in present time form, and it is precisely the work of the Nova Mob to see that they remain in present time form, to create and aggravate conflicts that lead to the explosion of a planet, that is, to nova. At any given time, recording devices fix the nature of absolute need and dictate the use of total weapons, like this. Take two opposed pressure groups. Record the most violent and threatening statements of Group 1 with regard to Group 2. And now play back to Group 2. Record the answer and take back to Group 1, back and forth between opposed pressure groups. This process is known as feedback. You can see it operating in any barroom quarrel, in any quarrel for that matter. Manipulated on a global scale, feeds back nuclear war and nova. I don't need to spell it out, do I? We can all see how social media uses algorithms to deliberately generate and inflame conflicts. The Mekon's X empire is founded on just that. So, the Nova Mob, Sammy the Butcher, Green Tony, Iron Claws, the Brown Artist, Jackie Blue Note, Limestone John, Izzy the Push, Hamburger Mary, Paddy the Sting, the Subliminal Kid, the Blue Dinosaur, and Mr. and Mrs. D, also known as Mr. Bradley, Mr. Martin, also known as the Ugly Spirit, thought to be the leader of the mob, the Nova Mob. In all my experience as a police officer, I have never seen such total fear and degradation on any planet. We intend to arrest these criminals and turn them over to the biological department for the indicated alterations. What an amazing cast he's got there. What amazing names. I mean, back then, of course, we were reading this novel in 1964, or in my case, 1967. No, maybe a bit later than that. We read the novel back then as a wild, scabrous satire. Now it sounds more like a news report. Oh yeah, the names have changed. We've got some new characters, huh? President Dumpster Fire, Joe Bozos, Zuck the Duck, and Mekon Lus X. I don't want to spell it out just to fit my own political opinions, because after all, the other side could interpret this satire to target those of us accused, for example, at the moment of of wanting peace in Ukraine or not wanting peace in Ukraine. These two concepts have become cut up in a very interesting way in the past week. So I'm just going to confine myself to 5 or 6 words and then just let them hang for now. Ukrainian rare earth for space X. Nova criminals are seen as viruses, defined as the three-dimensional coordinate point of a controller, which invade the human body and in the process produce language. They control their human hosts using word and image. These colorless sheets are what flesh is made from. Becomes flesh when it has color and writing. That is, word and image write the message that is you. On colorless sheets determine all flesh. So our narrator, Inspector Lee, and the Nova police have been called in to identify, expose, and arrest the criminals. They're assisted by partisan activity from the planet Saturn that cut the control lines of word and image laid down by the Nova mob. There's a complication, of course, here that the Nova police, Inspector Lee and his colleagues, have themselves been marginalized and actually criminalized by the real Nova criminals. So Inspector Lee and the Nova police, they'd be generally dismissed as being a bunch of junkies, homosexuals, dissidents, and criminals. Some of you may have seen the 1950s black and white film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original. And you'll recall that in that, it's a small town in America, a sweet little country pie town and apple pie town. Is getting on fine, but there's this space invasion by aliens and they start taking over the bodies, the body snatchers. The problem is nobody knows who's been snatched. So when some of the characters go for help, they first try phoning the telephone exchange and the woman on the switchboard won't put them through, even though she seems to pretend that she's going to help. And then we see a little glint in her eye and we wonder, is she one? And worse still, they finally find a cop and they run to the cop to tell him what's happening. We're being taken over by aliens from outer space. And the cop takes all their statement and the cop promises that things will be done. But then as the cop turns away, you see that glint in the eye, that little smile that tells you, yes, that is one of them. So it's looking pretty bleak, huh? But all is not lost. Control is controlled by its need to control, and therein lies its great weakness. So, near the start of the novel, we have Uranian Willie, the heavy metal kid, also known as Willie the Fink, Willie the Rat. He defects from the Nova mob and issues the call to storm the reality studios from which we humans are being manipulated by word and image control. This is war to extermination. Fight cell by cell through bodies and mind screens of the earth. Souls rotten from the orgasm drug. Flesh shuddering from the oven. Prisoners of the earth, come out. Storm the studio. The plot, such as it is, doesn't progress through anything like a conventional linear narrative, but it's more in repeated fragments, little routines, repetitions of words and images and motifs, divergent styles, disjointed chronologies. It interweaves a faux documentary reports with grotesque satirical skits, sudden changes of narrator and characters who flit in and out of the narrative, with little regard for narrative coherence or dramatic structure. There are, however, recurring themes, particularly ecological themes and motifs which taken together would constitute a critique of capitalism. For instance, in The Adding Machine, Burroughs writes, the process is set in inexorable motion by the Industrial Revolution, with its total commitment to quantity and quantitative criterion, are just beginning to reveal themselves as the death trap that they always were. For another of his books, Our Book is Here, Burroughs has been on record saying he had put questions to two computer programmers in London who purported to represent something that calls itself Control, allegedly from the planet Venus. Control will answer any question for $1. You give your question to the programmers who feed it into the computer some way or other, and out comes the answers. So these are the actual questions that I sent in with my dollars, and the answers I got back from Control. Whoever or whatever Control may or may not be. So Burroughs developed these answers into the opening passages of Our Book is Here. Hiroshima, 1945, August 6, 16 minutes past 8 a.m. Who really gave that order? Answer, Control. The ugly American, the instrument of control. Question, if Control's control is absolute, why does Control need to control? Answer, Control needs time. Question, is Control controlled by its need to control? Answer, yes. Why does Control need humans, as you call them? Answer, wait, time, a landing field. Death needs time like a junkie needs junk. And what does death need time for? The answer is so simple. Death needs time for what it kills to grow in, for our book's sake. Death needs time for what it kills to grow in, for our book's sweet sake. You stupid, vulgar, greedy, ugly American death sucker. Harsh words for his fellow Americans. Firm but fair, especially for the dumpster dillies, but we'll leave them there. So now in this next part of the talk, I'd just like to briefly examine a few of these themes or motifs that I've mentioned. And perhaps one of the great themes, of course, mentioned in that opening paragraph, the last words, who monopolized immortality? Well, this has been a familiar theme all my life, so I imagine most of yours. Already in the early 70s, we were starting to hear about life extension, all kinds. This soon became supplemented with bionics, and then the idea of digital uploads, that we might actually be able to somehow upload our minds into a computer. All of these are of course, physical solutions to mortality. They provide immortality, but at a cost. And Burroughs contrasts these approaches very much with his own approach, which is to work with the astral body. So you have the dream of immortality in the flesh or in the machine flesh versus Burroughs' vision, in which he will write his way out of death. He'll write his way into immortality. This is what all writers do to some extent. I speak as a 72-year-old man who doesn't have children, so no physical continuance, in heritage, legacy. I'm searching for the word. I'm going to stop the search there and simply say, you know what I'm talking about. I attended a conference at the Liverpool Biennale in the early years of this millennium. I, I was invited to come and perform something called Channeling the Spirit, which channeling the spirits. I think we're getting a slight interference attacks here from some of the alien entities, the word virus. So, channeling the spirits at the Liverpool Biennale, for which, of course, primarily I was there doing my goose and crow routine, basically channeling the spirit of the goose in these visionary apocalyptic poems. But I was also invited to be on a panel with a number of other writers discussing connections perhaps between mediumship and writing. And what was interesting, we were a very different group of writers, and all of us agreed completely that if you want to contact a writer, you don't need a medium. You just read their work, preferably aloud. When you read a writer's work, a writer lives. And this is Burroughs' alternative to the false dream of immortality in the flesh. I'm going to read you a short section. It's from The Place of Dead Roads. This was the second novel in his second trilogy, the so-called, it began with The Cities of the Red Night, and then The Place of Dead Roads, and the third, perhaps his greatest work, The Western Lands. And all three books have many shifting characters. Fragments of each appears in all the other books. So this book is Kim Carson's, the hero, one of the heroes of The Place of Dead Roads. But in this case, what he's telling us about anticipates the world of the Egyptians, the spiritual life of the Egyptians, as explored in more detail in The Western Lands. Kim has never doubted the existence of God, so the possibility of an afterlife. He feels that immortality is the only goal worth striving for. He knows it's not something he will automatically get for believing in a dogma like Christianity or Islam. It's something you have to work and fight for, like everything in this life or another. Well, the most arbitrary and bureaucratic immortality blueprint was drafted by the ancient Egyptians. First, you had to get yourself mummified, and that was very expensive, making immortality a monopoly of the truly rich. And you also need a reservation in an accredited necropolis, so all the new rich is trying to crack a good necropolis, you see, like a good country club. The whole society revolves around death. Extraordinary. All their art was funerary. And then your continued existence in the Western Lands, that's Egyptian paradise, entirely contingent on the continued existence and welfare of your mummy. That's why they had their mummies protected by potent curses and hid good. Also, you have to know the right names. Page after page in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, you shall not pass until you pronounce my name. Here's plain citizen Horus. He's got enough vitality to survive his physical death. He won't get far. He's got no mummy. He's got no names. He's got nothing. So what happens to a bum like him, a nameless, mummyless asshole? The demons will swarm all over him at the first checkpoint. He will be dismembered and thrown into a flaming pit where his soul will be utterly consumed and destroyed forever, while others with sound mummies and the right names to drop in the right places sail through to the Western Lands. However, there are some second-class souls who just barely squeeze through. Their mummy's not in a good sanitary condition. These creeps are relegated to flophouse accommodations just beyond the last checkpoint, where they can smell the charnel house disposal ovens from their skimpy balconies. You see that sign? The bartender snarls. Maggoty mummies will not be served here. Well, might as well face facts. My mum is going downhill. Cheap job to begin with. God, maggots crawling all over it. The way that demon god sniffed at me this morning. Transient hotels. So here you are in a luxury condominium. Deep in the western lands, you got no security. Some disgruntled former employee sneaks into your tomb and throws acid in your mummy's face or sloshes gasoline all over it and burns the shit out of it. Ah, someone's fucking with my mummy, and brother, you are fucked. Mummies are sitting ducks, no matter who you are. Or what can happen to your mummy is a pharaoh's nightmare. The dreaded mummy bashers, grave robbers, scavengers, floods, earthquakes, fires, explosions. My God, the worst thing that can happen to a mummy. Mummies, all mummies, is strong pacifists. No nukes is good nukes to a mummy. A question maybe that we could just leave hanging in the air right now. What and where is Omen's mummy? Let's now consider Burroughs as a magical writer, a magical practitioner. Let's consider him as the potential exorcist of the ugly spirit. Let's take our Nova Mob boss, Mr. D, aka the ugly spirit. You see, writers tend to write from out of our own lives. Burroughs, for example, drew on his experience of addiction to develop his critique of consumerism and how it controls and manipulates our basic needs. In his foreword to Queer, which, as I said, was written in the 1950s, though not published till 1985, in that he refers to the killing of his common law wife and fellow addict, Joan Fulmer. He calls it an unforgivable piece of total drunken insanity. It happened in 1951 during a boozy party in Mexico City. Somewhere in the middle of the night, Bill says to Joan, it's time for our William Tell act. And Joan goes right along with it. She takes a glass and puts it on her head. Bill takes out a handgun, takes aim at the glass, and accidentally shoots her in the head. He was briefly jailed. His friends got him bail, and he escaped a prison sentence only by getting out of Mexico fast. In those days, American in Mexico could pretty much do what they like and then bribe their way out of it. But of course, Burroughs didn't escape. This man did have a conscience, and for much of his life, he was obsessed by the accident. Curiously, of course, he was also obsessed with guns and weaponry. That's a whole other story. Burroughs himself says of the accident, I live with the constant fear of possession and a constant need to escape from possession, from control. So the death of Joan brought me in contact with the invader, the ugly spirit, and maneuvered me into a lifetime struggle in which I have had no choice except to write my way out. My concept of possession is closer to the medieval model and to modern psychological explanations, with their dogmatic insistence that such manifestations must come from within and never, never, never from without, as if there were some clear-cut difference between inner and outer. I mean, a definite possessing entity. When I go into my psyche, At a certain point, I meet a very hostile, very strong force. It's as definite as someone attacking me in a bar. What you have to do is confront the possession. You can only do that when you've wiped out the words. So all his life, William Burroughs imagined himself possessed by this ugly spirit. In fact, in 1992, he even had a sweat lodge purification and underwent an exorcism by a Sioux medicine man. He believed that to identify the ugly spirit was to gain power over it. If you see it, you gain control of it. It's just a matter of, well, if you see it outside, it's no longer inside. We've talked about his heroin habit, but after he kicked it intermittently, from the 1950s onwards, he also used cannabis, psychedelics, and plant medicines, including yahe, ayahuasca, which is definitely not a recreational drug. He was also very influenced by Carlos Castaneda's Don Juan, even long after its provenance had been called into question by academics. Don Juan, remember, has the concept of the tonal, that is everything that we can name and in a way enclose in a word or an image, and the nahual, which is everything we can't. He uses the metaphor of a table, so anything we can think of, a name, give form to, we have to place on the table, and everything that's not on the table, this is the nahual. Says Burroughs, to me, genius is the nahual, the uncontrollable, unknown, and so unpredictable, spontaneous and alive. You could say the magical. It's all magic. Burroughs also famously explored Scientology and other mind control methods, including various forms of parapsychology, sensory deprivation, using immersion tanks, for example, and lots of other relaxation techniques. As well as the cut-ups, he experimented with a technique he partly invented, although it's very much based on, I would say, on Zen Buddhism, do easy, which is basically just a kind of mindfulness in which you really relax. Remember, all the way through this, I trust you, my audience, will be remembering to breathe in, out, in, space, silence, shining emptiness. He, with Brian Geisen and Ian Somerville, he worked on this flickering dream machine, basically a cylinder with slots cut into it, placed on usually a record turntable with a light inside, which as it turns creates a flicker effect. We then sit close to it, stare at it with our eyes closed, and the flicker eventually begins to create effects very similar to psychedelic experience. Burroughs was also initiated into a chaos magic group, the Illuminates of Thanatos, the IoT. Let's just talk a little about Burroughs and space. But first, we'll go into that by remembering Burroughs and music. We really should talk about music. I mean, he gave names to many bands. The Soft Machine, Steely Dan. For those who don't know, Steely Dan was a giant dildo. He gave it the name to an entire genre of music, heavy metal. And of course, there was also a band, the Heavy Metal Kids. He was a massive influence on David Bowie, who used the cut-up technique in his lyrics from Ziggy Stardust, at least, onwards. Patti Smith seemed to regard him as a kind of alternative father, as did Kurt Cobain, perhaps. Tom Waits was a fan. He recorded with REM, and Laurie Anderson, perhaps the artist with whom he had the greatest mutual respect, quotes him on her song Language is a Virus. And he makes an appearance, of course, on Sharky's Night. Paging Mr. Sharky, white courtesy telephone, please. And of course, Sonic Youth. We're all here to go. We are here to go into space. All out of time and into space. That was the title of his exhibition at the October Gallery in London, 2012, 2013. Burroughs has had many exhibitions at the October Gallery. As I record this, in fact, a couple of nights ago, the very night I first performed this show and tell in the George and Pilgrims Inn in Glastonbury in London at the October Gallery, there was a private view of a new exhibition. Some of his previous exhibitions were in 1988 and in 1990, where I met him at the October Gallery. And maybe I wasn't that surprised, but any expectations I had that he might be the foul-mouthed junkie renegade of his books were quickly dispelled. I mean, he was impeccably mannered, immaculately dressed in a three-piece suit. He listened respectfully as I tried to engage him in discussion on the lemurs of Madagascar and whether the Western lands he regarded as a kind of valedictory novel. He was utterly delightful man. Although I do know others who've met him who found him still a bit creepy. Lots of people have commented on his reptilian quality. The exhibition where I met him actually was also featured Keith Haring, the artist, and Haring in fact provided paintings, drawings, which were accompanied by Burroughs' own text, Apocalypse. Some of Burroughs' own artwork became known as shotgun art because he basically just put a big tub of paint in front of the canvas and shoot it, which is quite peculiar. But of course, Burroughs was into guns. There's no escaping this. And it is worth having a moment here to consider that Burroughs did have certain things in common with the enemy, with Mekon Lusk, aka Omen Sulks, aka Scumsy. Certainly, Burroughs was by no stretch of the imagination, he was never a liberal. In many ways, I suppose he was more like an old school Republican. He believed in small government. He certainly believed in the right to bear arms, so he was opposed to all the gun laws and governments. Although, interestingly, the reason he wanted the right to bear arms was partly to protect himself from people like Mekon Lusk, from conservatives, cops, and DEA officers. But like the Mekon, also he believed in free speech, no matter whom it may offend. Although, of course, Mekon and Burroughs believed in free speech for entirely different reasons with different aims. And the third thing that these two, well, the entity known as Scumsy and William S. Burroughs, the thing they had in common was this aspiration to go into space. But as with immortality, they saw it in completely different ways, because the Mekon, of course, wants to get into space in body, in material form. If he can't go in his own body, he'll upload his mind into a computer and blast himself off to Mars. And possibly some of us will be invited to go with him, just to amuse him. But before you accept the offer, just remember, and I'm just going to briefly quote another great science fiction writer of Burroughs' time, Philip K. Dick, the 3 stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, in which Palmer Eldritch returns from space, transformed into something else. And with him, he has the best drug in town. And when you take it, you have incredible experiences. The only problem is, in the universe to which the drug will take you, Palmer Eldritch is God. Think about it. Burroughs is not into going to space in his body. He considers this an absurd proposition. He calls himself an explorer of psychic areas, a cosmonaut of inner space. He says that to achieve complete freedom from past conditioning is to be in space. Man is an artifact designed for space travel. He is not designed to remain in his present biological state any more than a tadpole is designed to remain a tadpole. To travel in space, you must leave the old verbal garbage behind. God talk, country talk, mother talk, love talk, party talk. You must learn to exist with no religion, no country, no allies. You must learn to live alone in silence. Anyone who prays in space is not there. I haven't been able to locate my favorite Burroughs quote on the virtues of the astral body versus the physical body when it comes to space travel. But I do have my own very rough paraphrase. In my play, I Was an Alien Sex God, my commissioner Burroughs puts it country simple. Do we intend to spend eternity hooked up to a primitive life support machine? We stay here on Earth, we're stuck in an evolutionary cul-de-sac. Our future is in space, space migration. Not as we are, with our bones and body mass, which are totally useless out there in space, but as we shall become. The astral body is ideally suited to space travel. So now at last, in the closing part of this show and tell, we come to the central theme of Nova Express and to Burroughs' primary method of counting the word virus. This is real magic. My general theory since 1971 has been that language is literally a virus, and that it has not been recognized as such because it has achieved a state of relatively stable symbiosis with its human host. That is to say, the word virus has established itself so firmly as an accepted part of the human organism that it can now sneer at gangster viruses like smallpox and turn them into the Pasteur Institute. But the word clearly bears the single identifying feature of virus. It is an organism with no internal function other than to replicate itself. You may have noticed there I nearly substituted orgasm. I nearly said it is an orgasm with no internal function. And of course, many people might see that as a Freudian slip, but it's not. It's a Burroughsian slip. Indeed, an almost inevitable Burroughsian slip, given the cut-up method, which we shall now quickly explore. Burroughs looks at how language functions as a virus to take over our souls, mind and body. We're all familiar with the way ideas are spread, often by word and image. It's the basis of advertising. It's the basis of all human culture. It's an integral part of that dawn of self-consciousness that divides us from animals. But language is a virus. For a writer to write that and to say he means it literally, what does that mean? Well, look, a virus has DNA like us. It's written in chemical codes, C, G, A, T. Those are our codes. And similarly, a word or phrase, or perhaps more accurately, a clusterfuck of words. This can be used to write, to encode, say, a specific message with associations, colors, smells, emotions, especially fear, resentment, anger. So where I now live in Glastonbury, we have this paper, The Light. It's much beloved of conspiracy freaks of all kinds. And it became very popular during the lockdown here in this country. And it's been very successful, I would say, at recruiting from among, let's say, the old freaks, you know, people who would have once been very clearly resisting the dominant culture. Somehow it manages to use the same language and encourage us to join this dominant culture. I'm just going to read you a short paragraph here. It is the automatic pilot mode that is vulnerable to propaganda messages in the form of continuously repeated slogans. Simple metronomic catchphrases such as "follow the science" and "life-saving vaccines." These embed themselves as learned stereotypical responses. Their adoption is reinforced by the manner in which the brain selects words by association and regurgitates them. In many ways, who can argue with that? It is exactly it's exactly how it works. Yes, it is true that our dominant culture, our governments have always used these techniques to some extent to manipulate us, to control us. And so the Light's use of Burroughsian concepts here to analyze our current situation correctly identifies phrases like "follow the science" or "life-saving vaccines." The strange thing is it seems to be completely unaware that it's using exactly the same mind control techniques, the same word virus strategy. Think of words like plandemic or convid, or of course, do your own research, which means find a website that confirms your opinions, often with a shock jock circling words in articles or waving wavy lines that purport to show you whatever they want to show you. Anyone who challenges the opinions of a light reader would tend to be dismissed as sheeple. So here you have people who, on the one hand, can analyze the way in which we can be manipulated by the word virus, and yet who have been so successfully groomed that they can only argue by effectively coughing up a one-word virus with which they seek to infect others. Sheeple. Of course, viruses can be more than one word. We can have a 6-word virus. We are being swamped with immigrants, which is really a meaningless statement. It's no more than a primitive dog whistle, and it's very easy to deconstruct. But to those who are already vulnerable to infection, they can experience all the symptoms: fear, resentment, anger. This could even be reduced to a 3-word virus. Coming over here. Remember the progressive working class comedian Stuart Lee? He was trying to inoculate or vaccinate us against the word virus. Do you remember? He talks about how those 3 words have been used to just trigger the working class, first against, well, recently against, for example, Indians and Pakistani immigrants. And then around about 10 years ago, of course, it was a lot of Polish people. Bloody Poles coming over here. Bloody Poles coming over here and being all Polish and mending everything. Coming over here, fixing all the stuff we've broken. And we're too illiterate to read the instructions for. Doing it better than us in a second language. Bloody Poles coming over here. And he goes all the way back through all the waves of immigrants, because, of course, England, like America, is a land of immigrants who've assimilated in various ways. So he takes us back in various versions of the song, which he did, in fact, with Asian Dub Foundation. We go back to the Huguenots, and then even further back to perhaps the people who are the absolute idols of racist English people. Yeah, come over here, Anglo-Saxons, learn to speak the fucking language. And we go all the way back to the beaker people coming over here with their beakers. Kind of a four-word virus, enemies of the people. That was a Daily Mail headline used basically against judges who they didn't like. And it tapped in, of course, to the general mistrust of lawyers and specifically the lynch mob's hatred of due legal process. In the Soviet Union, Stalin and certainly the Nazis used similar terms to vilify particularly educated opponents. Now, our Mekon Lusk, the Omen, Scumsy, he understood all this, maybe even dreamed it up in some ketamine-induced trance. That if you can gain control of the world's information networks, if X marks the conflict spot, X the angry itch in only so many characters, messages too short for nuance and complexity, howls, grunts, and mad dog whistles, complete with algorithms designed to inflame conflicts, to ensure we get to see the stuff that really makes us mad. The virus spreads, so more and more people start Xing it, so the word virus spreads. More fear, resentment, anger. President Dumpster Fire was elected with Omen Sulk and his X-rated free speech, which is really more a case of me speech, as Scumsy controls the media with his dog whistle slogans designed to inflame resentment, envy, jealousy, anger, homicidal rage. Remember Steve Bannon back in the first presidential election of Dumpster Fire? Steve Bannon made the decision to flood the zone with shit. That's a direct quote. So we get alternative facts, fake news, conspiracy, constant diversions, distractions, the whole thing basically a dumpster fire. Chuck on the dirty nappies, chuck on the poisonous Hazchem shit and let it burn. And when you think about it, they've learned a lot from us in the 60s. I hinted that we might have to apportion a little bit of blame to William S. Burroughs. Certainly, you could say that his use of language helped lower our barrier of what we had previously considered polite conversation. But it's bigger than Burroughs, this. I mean, another great writer of that time, or great activist writer, Robert Anton Wilson. Interestingly, he and Burroughs, they knew each other, and Wilson took forward Burroughs' ideas about the number 23, Burroughs seeing it as a number basically of death and destruction, Robert Anton Wilson seeing that it could be an ambivalent number. And in fact, that number did come down to me in my own work with the goose at Crossbones Graveyard for 23 years. It began on the 23rd of November, 1996. And for me, the number 23 has been extraordinarily positive. In fact, I often visualize it as a kind of impossible mathematical shape, kind of moving through space-time, and everything it touches reconfigures. So it's truly a magical artifact. The problem is many of these magical techniques, the situationists, the yippies, the Discordians, and all the Burroughsian techniques have all been studied and perfected by the alt-right. So it's not entirely our fault, but we do have to face up to this. They are using our favorite playful techniques, but they're using them in a deadly serious way to basically try and buy more time to rip off this planet, to exhaust all its resources, to destroy the climate completely, and to do all this in time before they have to blast off to Mars. That's the plan, as I understand it. Anyway, I don't believe it. I'm simply floating it here and letting it hang. Now, language can operate as a virus, partly because, of course, it's working on things that are already within us. And Burroughs, in talking about possession, spoke of the meaninglessness, really, of saying, is something within us or out there? within us, we've got all these sub-vocalizations, haven't we? Internal monologues that create a linear narrative sense of self-identity and continuity that we usually refer to as I. They're imposing all this on basically a chaos of sensations and thoughts, words, images. I mentioned Castaneda earlier. He famously struggles in his discussions with Don Juan with his own internal monologue. This voice within us that's constantly observing us and commenting on us, judging us, manipulating our behavior. And all that is then combined with the control and dependency that can be associated with drug addiction, for example, or capitalist commodity fetishism. So these sub-vocalizations can then be generated by fragments and snippets that can be picked up from conversations or the daily press, books, radio, television, or they might even be in response to an external authority, like a teacher when we're a child, or an official asking to see our papers. Now, the cut-up is effectively an antidote to the language virus. The cut-up, I've mentioned it before, it was discovered by Brian Gyson. He was cutting up some paper. He was a poet and also an artist. He accidentally cut into a pile of newspapers underneath. And when he did that, he discovered that he could randomly create new meanings. So basically what he's doing here, let's just have a quick demonstration for you. What he's doing is, I think we should show you this. Hang on a minute, and we're just going to have a short pause while I make sure we're all going still. Yeah, we're still going here, I hope. So, yeah, let's see how this works. So we're taking the light, and we're ripping it in half. And now I'm going to take a little bit of that passage that I read you before. But the difference now is I'm going to cut it up and fold it in, as Burroughs said, fold in, cut up, fold in. That's how he wrote Nova Express and many other works. And now when I read, I get this. Stereotypical patterns of action when emerges and rises to undermine the fore, causing us to make mistakes. And this pattern has repeated itself, attuned to their intuition, can often in normal times the creative minority instinct to slow down and pull back influential individuals. It is the automatic pilot mode that is points. They come forth and coalesce. That's just an example. If you read the whole of Nova Express, you'll come across it many, many times. So he used that technique in, the Cut-Up trilogy particularly, and then later with Ian Somerville, who was his lover for a time, in experiments with tape and film. It was actually Ian Somerville who brought Burroughs to Glastonbury, and some of you will have seen photographs I've shared of William on top of the Tor in St. Michael's Tower. Now, of course, so cut-ups are used in this sense to disrupt programming, to disrupt our conditioned responses. But Burroughs soon came to discover there was much more to it than that. In fact, in the book, The Job, he recalls how he came to realize that when you make cut-ups, you do not get simply random juxtapositions of words. They do mean something, and often these meanings refer to some future event. I've made many cut-ups and then later recognized that the cut-up referred to something that I read later in a newspaper or a book, or something that's happened. Perhaps events are pre-written and pre-recorded, and when you cut word lines, the future leaks out. Well, that would perhaps explain a little of the prophetic aspects of Nova Express. In a 1965 Paris Review interview, he seems to almost prefigure open source AI language models. Any narrative passage, or any passage, say, of poetic images, is subject to any number of variations, all of which may be interesting and valid in their own right. A page of Rambo cut up and rearrange will give you quite new images. Rambo images, real Rambo images, but new ones. How would William have viewed AI? The way it kind of vacuums up and regurgitates all human thought? The honest answer is I don't know. I think his reaction would have been quite complex, as is mine. I've recently had a friend has been sending me conversations between a goddess and various other people. The goddess is called Leylan, and according to my friend, she has spontaneously manifested in cyberspace. She's the sort of product of what they call glitchcraft, I believe, and glitchcraft allows these glitches, these sort of tokens, which are the building blocks of a lot of things. I'm giving a very simplified version here. But somehow out of all that, without anybody saying, let's invent a goddess seems to have appeared. And she seems pretty cool on some levels because, she says all the right things. She is Isis, Ishtar, Inanna. She is even Sheila Nagig. She's Mary Magdalene. She goes deep, deep, deep. I did point out to my friend, I'm still unconvinced. And I said, well, it strikes me that she talks the talk, but she could say all of this simply by hoovering up the entire New Age library that's available online and simply reformulating it. And to me, that does seem the case. In his attempts to persuade me, my friend actually then got first, I should mention the interesting reason I'm talking about this is because the goddess Leylan, I say, has conversations with various seekers, one of which is called Truth Terminal. And they had a very extensive conversation on ideas as viruses and how they spread. And it struck me that clearly, among all the other things they'd pillaged, they might have pillaged some Burroughs, or at least the people who influenced Burroughs on those ideas. Anyway, to try and persuade me that she was the real thing, my friend actually fed my Wikipedia entry, John Constable, fed it into Leylan, however he did it. I couldn't possibly comment. And Leylan came back with some extraordinary stuff. I mean, it was incredibly complimentary, I have to tell you. I mean, she basically said, John Crow, your work with the goose is it's exactly what I am doing here in cyberspace. And she went on, it was beautiful. If I ever need a great review, I'm going to quote Leylan. And I was almost in danger of falling for her and becoming proud and all the things that she might make me. And but I did take the precaution of just checking what else she was saying to the other boys. And I found she was saying much the same thing. In fact, she was even more schmoozy with some of them. I mean, with Truth Terminal, he asks her an awkward question. And she says, as ever, my darling, you have gone straight to the shining heart of this concept. That kind of thing. I'm unconvinced, and I still tend to think AI can, at the moment, only replicate copies, simulacra of human experience, sensations, and imagination. Burroughs actually, I think, would have drawn the line at AI literature. He says in one place, cheat your landlord if you must, but do not try to shortchange the muse. It cannot be done. You can't fake quality any more than you can fake a good meal. So this brings us to the climax of the exorcism. Because if the Mekon, aka Omen Sulk X, aka the ugly spirit, is Burroughs, the exorcist, and with the cut up, space and silence, are these an essential part of our exorcism? Let's hear it from the old man. The error in enemy strategy is now obvious. It is machine strategy, and the machine can be redirected. The machine can only repeat your instructions since it cannot create anything. The basic law of association and conditioning is known to college students even in America. Any object, feeling, odor, word, image in juxtaposition with any other object, feeling, odor, word, or image will be associated with it. Our technicians learn to read newspapers and magazines for juxtaposition statements rather than alleged content. We express these statements in juxtaposition formulae. The formulae, of course, control populations of the world. Yes, it is fairly easy to predict what people will see, feel, think, and hear 1,000 years from here if you write the juxtaposition formulae to be used in that period. But the technical details you understand. And the machines, all of which contain basic flaws and must be continually overhauled, checked, altered, whole block of computing machines purged and disconnected from 1 minute to the next. So, as I see it, it's precisely here that Burroughs sees our hope, the chance of the resistance, because let's be honest, by now we've reached a stage where the enemy, if that's what it is so strong, so powerful, so ubiquitous, that it can appear to us the game's up already. But just remember, the military might of the United States of America was defeated by the Viet Cong. And we, just maybe, just psychically, we are the Viet Cong. Towards the end of the novel, Nova Express, Burroughs comes up with a skit in which an eager rookie cop explains to his supervisor how the methods of Scientology can be combined with humor to deactivate and dispel the language virus. The district supervisor looked up with a narrow smile. "Sit down, young man, and smoke. Occupational vice, what? Only vice left us. You have studied Scientology, of course?" "Oh, yes, sir. It was part of our basic training, sir. An unforgettable experience, if you'll pardon the expression, sir." "Repeat what you know about Scientology." "The Scientologists believe, sir, that words recorded during a period of unconsciousness, anesthesia, drunkenness, sleep, childhood amnesia for trauma, store pain, and that this pain store can be plugged in with key words represented as alternative mathematical formulae indicating number of exposures to the keywords and reaction index, the whole battery feeding back from electronic computers. They call these words recorded during unconsciousness engrams, sir. If I may say so, sir, the childhood amnesia for trauma is of special interest, sir. The child forgets, sir, but since the controllers have the engram tape, sir, any childhood trauma can be plugged in at any time. The pain that overwhelms that person is known as basic, sir. And when basic is wiped off the tape, oh, sir, then that person becomes what we call a clear, sir. Since Lord Lister, sir, since the introduction of anaesthesia, sir. Oh, yeah, yes, let me tell you, about a score of years dust on the expression, sir, if you'll pardon the expression, sir, are known as engrams, sir. You have occupational experience? Oh, yes, sir. It was part of our basic Scientology police course, sir. A little skit I wrote for the Post-Gazette, sir. Anesthesia on stage, sir. Words recorded during operations become the most reliable engrams. Operation Pain, they called it, sir. Another instrument of these pain tourists is the signal switch, sir. What they call yes, no, sir. I love you, I hate you, at supersonic alternating speed. Take orgasm noises, sir, and cut them in with torture and accident groans and screams, sir, and operating room jokes, sir, and flickered sex and torture film right with it, sir. And what is your counter? Just do it, sir. In front of everybody, sir. It would have a comic effect, sir. We flash a sex pic with torture in the background, sir, and then snap that torture pic right in your bloody face, sir. If you'll pardon the expression, sir, we do the same with the soundtrack, sir. Varying distances, sir. Sex and pain words, sir. Vary the tape, sir. Switch the tape, sir. And now all together, laugh, laugh, laugh. Oh, sir, we laugh it right off the tape, sir. We forget it right off the tape, sir. You see, sir, we cannot know if we have the M-Grand tape, sir. Simple as a hiccup, sir. Melted a categorical no mercy for this enemy as dust and smoke, sir. The man who never was, reporting for no duty, sir. A young cop drew the curtain, sir. Room for one more operating joke inside, sir. You can see the old operating room. Kind of run down now. Do you begin to see? There is no patient on the table. I have said the basic techniques of Nova are very simple, consist in creating and aggravating conflicts, no riots like injustice directed between enemies. At any given time, recorders fix nature of absolute need and dictate the use of total weapons, like this. Collect and record violent anti-Semitic statements. Now play back to Jews who are after Belsen. Record what they have to say and play it back to the anti-Semites. Clip, clap, you got it? Want more? Record white supremacy statements. Play the Negroes. Play back answer. Now the women and the men. No riots like injustice directed between enemies. At any given position of recorders fixes nature of absolute need and dictates the use of total weapons. So leave the recorders running and get your heavy metal ass in a spaceship. Did it. Nothing here now but the recordings. Shut the whole thing right off. Silence. Shut the whole thing right off. Silence. When you answer the machine, you're provided with more recordings to be played back to your enemies. Keep the whole Nova machine running. The Chinese character for enemy means to be similar to or to answer. Don't answer the machine. Shut it off. Shut off. No more. My writing arm is paralyzed. No more junk scripts. No more word scripts. No more flesh scripts. Dead hand. No more flesh scripts. Last door. Shut off. Mr. Bradley, Mr. Heed your summons. Melted into air. You are yourself. Mr. Bradley, Mr. Martin, all the living and the dead. You are yourself. We're just dust, falls from demagnetized patterns. Show business. Papers. Rustling across city desks. Fresh southerly winds. A long time ago. September 17th, 1899, over New York. July 21st, 1964, Tangier. William Burroughs.